Diesels are dying, or so the headlines would have you believe. But what's actually going on in the world of diesel? If you're the kind of car enthusiast who stays on top of the news, you may have noticed a few months ago that the then head of Toyota in Australia made the seemingly wild prediction that diesels would be on the way out by the middle of next decade. Now, I was in the room when the executive in question, Sean Hanley, said those comments. His worldview on diesel was not exactly unexpected, nor is it exactly that crazy. And that's because in the car industry, it has been widely acknowledged for some time now that diesel as a powertrain technology is kind of on its last legs. And bear in mind, we're only talking here about passenger cars, SUVs, and light commercial vehicles. Heavy freight, rail, sea freight, those are different worlds entirely. We're not dealing with those in the scope of this video. Now, I'll be going into the various reasons why the industry doesn't have much faith in diesel anymore, but recently this news came out. The European Commission recently decided to walk back decarbonisation targets for the automotive industry in that region, eliminating a 100% emissions reduction requirement that would have seen internal combustion engines, including diesels, no longer able to be legally sold within the European Union. The target is now a 90% reduction on 2021 figures, which is still ambitious, but it gives a small window for combustion engines to still exist in the future automotive landscape in that region. So now that those targets have been made a little bit more permissive, surely the reports on diesel's imminent death are a little bit exaggerated. Well, not really. Although Europe is easily the largest regional market for diesel passenger cars and SUVs, the removal of the 2035 European zero emissions target doesn't mean oil burners are back on the menu. The truth is that target wasn't the only reason the industry isn't making any big plans for diesels beyond 2035. There are several reasons, and I'm going to walk you through each of them. Let's go. Vehicle emissions of all kinds affect public health, and some of them operate on a long time frame, such as CO2 and other greenhouse gases, while others operate on a shorter to medium term time frame, like particulates and nitrogen oxides. And diesel engines are far, far worse than petrol engines when it comes to those latter, shorter term health effects. They emit more soot, which causes respiratory problems in any air-breathing creature, not just humans. And the nitrogen oxides can also have a range of effects on the human body, ranging up to neurological issues, as well as things like cardiac problems. Nitrogen oxides, or NOx, you might have heard of, those things are a more immediate health concern for human life. Well, you can look at it in the same way that we now look at leaded petrol. Once we eliminated that from the transport fuel supply, health outcomes were better as a result. The issues that we were seeing around leaded fuel, which range from like cognitive impairment and other sort of long-term issues, those kind of fell away. And now we have a full generation and then some of human beings that haven't had leaded fuel in their immediate environment, up in the air that they breathe, and they're all the better for it. We're now looking at diesel as a fuel in the same way. So legislating against it on health grounds alone kind of makes sense. But why is Europe so important in this discussion? The world's a big place after all, and diesels are really popular in other parts of the globe as well, including right here in Australia. We love diesels, and I'll go into some of those numbers that back up that claim that we love diesels. But why are we focusing on Europe? Well, up until the end of the previous decade, diesel was seen not so much as the preserve of SUVs or off-roaders or commercial vehicles. It was very much a mainstream fuel. And just to highlight how in love the Europeans were with diesels, this is a fact that it wasn't just something that you'd find in hatchbacks, sedans, SUVs and stuff, but you'd also find things like diesel sports cars, sports coupes, compact city cars, hot hatches that were diesel powered. Audi was even contemplating a diesel engine version of its R8 supercar and even previewed it with the R8 V12 TDI concept. Diesel mania really was that pervasive over in Europe at that time. So if Europe was previously a diesel stronghold but is now prepared to turn its back on it, well, it kind of makes sense then that the rest of the world should maybe follow suit. Now, petrol, of course, has the same battle when it comes to emissions, but the issue there is more on CO2 than it is on NOx and particulates. In simple terms, petrol just burns cleaner and emits less. It is less problematic from an emissions standpoint. In the previous decade, car makers spent many billions of dollars trying to clean up diesel engines. And while it's indeed possible to do so with DPFs and exhaust aftertreatment, it leads to increased complexity, high manufacturing costs, more maintenance load, and more potential for things to go wrong. Just ask anyone who's put AdBlue in their diesel tank by mistake. And that kind of brings me to my next point. We're at a moment in time where the world's car makers, even the most well-resourced ones, can't greenlight everything. Program costs for new platforms, powertrains, and software programs are more expensive than ever. And every program needs to be able to pay back its dev costs as fast as possible as well. And especially these days when engines not only need to extract the maximum of power and torque, but also do so with better fuel efficiency and cleaner emissions than the engines they're replacing. They also need to do all of that while being durable enough to survive the warranty period and being affordable enough to build so that they don't make the car they're going in unprofitable for the manufacturer. The cost of developing a new engine is measured in billions of dollars. There's no such thing as a cheap engine anymore. And so for passenger cars where both petrol and diesel engines have been offered side by side, it's an easy call for an automaker to simply withdraw the slightly more problematic and expensive diesel option and make the model line petrol only, or more realistically, a petrol-electric hybrid. And that reduces development dollars in the process. And what we're also seeing in the industry is a steady migration towards adapting petrol engines from these passenger vehicle segments into segments where diesel has traditionally been dominant, like SUVs, off-roaders, and light commercial vehicles. And electrification is really enabling that. Case in point, the Land Cruiser. Sean Hanley's comments around diesel going the way of the dodo were made at a media preview for the petrol-electric 300 series Land Cruiser Hybrid. Here's a link to a video that I did on that. The logic there is that if a petrol engine is capable of doing the same job as a diesel engine, then why bother with the diesel at all? There are also other forces that will pull car makers away from diesels. As car brands delete diesel models from their portfolios, the number of diesel powertrains offered will reduce. As the market for diesel cars gets smaller and smaller, the cost of sourcing the parts that are unique to a diesel powertrain, mainly the fuel system and turbocharger components, will increase as the economy of scale falls away, and likely increase to a level that is unsustainable. And rather than lose profit, that will be the point that car makers switch over to something else. Which brings me neatly to the next point. By the middle of the 2030s, the expectation is that diesels will be a dud choice compared to two competing powertrains: petrol-electric hybrids and hydrogen electric. What about battery electrics? Well, there's a growing consensus that battery electric vehicles are not really the right fit for a diesel replacement, mainly because they add a lot of weight to a vehicle, and diesels are typically used in applications where you do need to have a reasonable amount of payload capacity, and if that is being subtracted by the battery weight, then it's kind of a non-starter. And you can even see that shift happen in real time right now, with Ford announcing that the next iteration of the F-150 Lightning will move away from being a pure electric vehicle to a range extender electric vehicle, essentially an EV with a small-ish battery with a onboard generator to help put volts in that battery as it runs down. Almost all diesel powertrains that are in production right now will need replacement over the coming decade. And as I mentioned before, with the introduction of much tighter emissions rules making it more expensive to design new diesels that would comply with those rules, that naturally lengthens the payback period for any new engines. In the past, the strategy would be to simply increase the expected lifespan of that powertrain to compensate for that. But with the sunset on diesel combustion fast approaching, that's not really an option anymore. On the other side of the coin, petrol engines, as we established earlier, aren't as problematic as diesel engines from emissions point of view, but also when you hook them up to an electric motor to create a petrol-electric hybrid, you end up with a low-end torque fill that does a pretty decent job of mimicking the relaxed drivability and pulling power of a traditional diesel. And that's a big chunk of the reason why Toyota went with a petrol-electric setup for the 300 series Land Cruiser hybrid. It has better performance outright than the diesel, while also not compromising on things like towing capability. The diesel 300 series isn't going anywhere for the time being, but the addition of the petrol hybrid is clearly a stepping stone to a diesel-free future for that model. The engine that powers it, a 3.5-litre turbo petrol V6, was originally introduced in the Lexus LS, but has since seen more extensive use in Toyota Group SUVs and pickups. Equipped with an electric assistance motor in the Land Cruiser hybrid application, it makes 340 kilowatts of power and 790 newton meters of torque, significantly more than what the 3.3-litre diesel produces in that same model. With overall fuel economy looking to be similar or better than the diesel, there's definitely an argument to be made that the diesel's role is becoming redundant. And my expectation is that if the petrol hybrid is able to prove its worth, then this generation of Land Cruiser will be the last one to have a diesel engine available. And we can see similar things happening in the ute segment. The BYD Shark 6 has proved that ute buyers aren't allergic to petrol hybrid tech, and the Ford Ranger PHEV has also done a similar thing to the Land Cruiser by taking a petrol engine, in its case the 2.3-litre turbo inline-4 from the Mustang, and combining it with an electric motor and making it do things that you'd traditionally task a diesel with. It can still tow 3,500 kilos, and with 207 kilowatts and 697 newton meters when in hybrid mode, the Ranger PHEV has more power and torque than the 3-litre V6 diesel option. On paper, that's a win-win. In the Ranger's case, the formula works pretty well, and as with the Cruiser, I'll be fairly surprised if they bother spending money on an all-new diesel for the next generation. If it gets one at all, it'll probably only be as a carryover engine for certain markets, because the cost of making a new generation diesel happen likely won't be recouped by that point, and that money would be better spent on other powertrains. Now, speaking of other powertrains, I did mention earlier hydrogen. Now, as a lot of you will know, hydrogen's a bit of a dud fuel right now. Very few places on the planet have the refueling infrastructure to support a hydrogen-powered fleet, and there's very, very limited choice when it comes to production hydrogen vehicles anyway. However, over the next 10 years, it's expected to make inroads into the world of heavy freight, and that is expected to be the catalyst for a greater rollout of hydrogen infrastructure. In 10 years' time, the hydrogen landscape is probably going to look pretty different, and manufacturers like Toyota and Hyundai continue to test the waters with a small handful of hydrogen cars. Toyota in particular is heavily invested in hydrogen, and has also taken the surprising step of confirming that a hydrogen fuel cell Hilux is just around the corner. With electric drive promising massive torque and hydrogen having much greater energy density than a battery with lithium chemistry, it could hold great appeal for people used to torquey diesels with long legs, and in my opinion anyway, it makes a bit more sense than a battery electric for that kind of application. Now, Toyota is still having an each-way bet because they also have confirmed that there is a Hilux with a battery in it, a purely electric Hilux. Now, as predicted, the payload and towing capacity of that battery electric Hilux is not that great. Stands to reason you're sacrificing a lot of that payload by putting in a massive and heavy battery into the platform, especially because that platform was not designed from the outset to have a huge battery in it. Compromises need to be made, and the compromise there is in payload. And I think for most people who use utes for stuff like moving heavy stuff on a trailer or in the tub, that is going to be a deal breaker. And it really just helps illustrate why the majority of the world's manufacturers aren't looking to battery electric as being the diesel replacement. They're looking at a broad range of things. For some manufacturers, battery electric will be one such solution. For example, Ford have a battery electric version of the Transit Custom, but also by the same token, they have a plug-in hybrid variant of the transit custom as well. I think it'll be very interesting to see over time which one of those variants that the majority of transit buyers gravitate towards. Maybe you can place your bets now in the comments. But are diesels really disappearing? And if petrol-electric hybrids are so good, then why not make diesel-electric hybrids? Why aren't they a thing? Well, besides adding cost to a vehicle program, electrifying diesels is not impossible, but it sure is difficult. Like most heat engines, diesels need to run hot to be at their most efficient. And while petrols are fine with short duty cycles, diesels really dislike running in short spurts, which is generally how regular hybrids prefer to run. Even so, Chinese carmaker Chery has revealed that it's investigating a diesel-electric plug-in hybrid powertrain for a future model. This could be a great thing if you want to run long distances towing heavy things, where the diesel engine can use its low-end torque to efficiently generate electrical power, much like a diesel-electric locomotive. But you also want the flexibility to run purely electric on shorter drives. Now that's something that the ute market might actually look quite favorably upon, so I'm kind of keen to see what Chery rolls out there. And also, most automakers aren't saying they've stopped diesel engine development entirely either. But besides that, the consumption of diesel is still a big part of the global appetite for transport fuel right now. These figures from the International Energy Agency show diesel fuel accounting for just under 32% of total oil-derived fuel consumption for 2023. Now that percentage mix varies depending on the region, with it being a relatively low 23% in the United States and a very high 53.5% here in Australia. Remember how I said that Europe was a core market for diesels? Well, it's even higher over there, registering at 56% of the total transport fuel mix. But those numbers won't stay static. Obviously, places like the USA already don't care that much for diesel-powered transport. Most diesels over there are in freight trucks or trains. But in Europe, the tide is turning on diesel for the passenger car and SUV sector. More money is flowing into petrol-electric and fully electric projects than diesel, with hydrogen also picking up a bit of R&D cash too. Consumers keen to save money or save the environment are increasingly being better served by petrol-electric hybrids or full EVs. In Europe, long seen as diesel's stronghold, consumption of diesel peaked in 2017 and has been in a slow decline since. Meanwhile, petrol consumption has been in a steady increase since 2020. Those trend lines are expected to continue. What's also clear is that diesel as a technology for passenger cars is facing challenges that are legislative, economic, and technological in nature, and that's just far too many fronts to fight against. Looking into the future, there are simply easier options than persisting with diesel engines. The pace of our migration away from diesel is going to be interesting to witness, and only time will tell whether Sean Hanley's prediction about diesel going the way of the dodo by 2035 turns out to be true or not. But what are your thoughts? Is the industry wrong on diesel? Does it deserve a stay of execution? Is the strategy of replacing diesel with electrified petrol and hydrogen the wrong one? Let us know in the comments below. But also, thank you for watching all the way through to the end of this video. I really do appreciate it. Share it around if you think someone else might get something out of it. And by all means, if you like what you see, follow, subscribe, do all that stuff. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you again. Goodbye.